So I want to get back to my question / comments on the difference between kill dry versus 100% wet. So, and Ron, please correct me at any point of this if it's not quite correct here, but I think there is a big difference here and a distinction that needs to be made, because a lot of people will say, oh, I'll just turn up the mix 100% and all the dry disappears. Let's say on like a Boss DD7. This is a perfect example. Kill dry is not available on a Boss DD7 as far as a global menu change. So when we're talking about routing a rig with, let's say, the PBC6X, like we've just been mentioning, if we're using a normal splitter, this would work on a PBC6X, just a normal buffered splitter, and then you turn the DD7 off because it doesn't have kill dry. Now you're just going to pass dry signal through the DD7 as you normally would. Whereas on, let's say, a Strymon timeline, you set it to kill dry, which is 100% wet, and then you turn the timeline off, it mutes that signal. And so that, in my mind, is the really big distinction. There's other things like you turn the mix down on a timeline and kill dry, and it brings the whole delay level down with it all the way to off. So are there any other things that we need to talk about with the difference between kill dry versus 100% wet when you're in a parallel rig? Or did I butcher the explanation? Anything you'd adjust there or inform people about?
It seems like, different manufacturers implement it differently. Like I definitely have run into the thing that you mentioned about, Strymon pedals, the mix knob becomes effectively just a wet level control, or just overall level control. And it'll depend on whether the pedal is buffered bypass or true bypass. And I don't think there's any particular standard from manufacturer to manufacturer on how that's going to be implemented. I can't recall any examples off the top of my head, but there probably are pedals that are just completely, there is no difference between 100% wet and kill dry, and it just behaves the same way. But generally speaking, when it's kill dry, it's really, it's truly just eliminating the dry signal altogether through the entire pedal. And so whether setting it 100% wet achieves the same result is going to depend on how the pedal was built.
I have a question, Ron, which selfishly pertains to a rig that I'm building right now, and I'm building a pedal board that is inspired in the Nashville standards, and I am using one of the Nashville standards, which is the old Line 6 M9. And I find myself in need of a mixer. And I found that on the M9, it doesn't have any sort of analog drive-through whatsoever. And I know that some purport that this is not an issue. And I find that it's generally not if you're running the thing just strictly in stereo and in all serial, effects. But when you start to run it in a wet, dry, wet context, and you have a reference now of the actual dry signal that's split separately from it, that latency without a mixer is very noticeable because of the non-analog dry signal path. And you have a specific diagram here, which I think is actually perfectly fits my needs and is in fact how I'm planning to implement the line mixer, which is a little bit different than a standard wet, dry, wet application, kind of like we talked about before. Whereas you can see on this diagram where you have all your dry effects and overdrives, in essence, coming into the dry input on the mixer, which is on the bottom right. And then you're taking the buffered output and you're creating, I believe in this case, a splitter cable. Is that right, Ron?
If you're skilled enough to make a three-way splitter cable, you can do that, or there are splitter boxes and all that. But whatever it takes to create a passive split, like 1 in and 3 out.
Yeah, this buffered output has a low enough output impedance where it's going to be able to drive that splitter cable without any issue.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons we go through the buffer first, is just so that it can handle the split.
Yeah, and so you've got it split. And in my case, I don't even really need to do that for the M9, because I'm just going to take the buffer out. It's going to go into the input of the M9, And then I have the stereo outs of the M9 feeding one of the mixer inputs, doesn't matter which one. And then I'm able to reincorporate my dry signal so that I can get rid of that non-analog drive-through, the DSP bypass that's on it. And I can restore my original analog dry signal that's coming into it. And this way, if I do split it, and I do have the option to do that on my rig where I can run it wet, dry, wet, or I can run it all in series in front of 2 stereo amps, I don't have any consequence of doing that. Now, in the case of this particular effect, I don't know that they actually go 100% wet. I was experimenting with it a bit and trying to see the best way to do it. Since it is always on in some capacity, I seem to be able to get away with not having the effects 100% wet, because I don't believe all of them do or even are capable of going 100% wet on that particular device.